The chill wind of the Tay carried with it the faint tang of brine and a foreboding quiet, unusual even for a winter's night in Perth. The flickering torches along the cloistered walls of Blackfriars Monastery cast uncertain shadows, and it was there, within those ancient hallowed halls, that treachery most foul was wrought. King James Stuart, the poet king, beloved by some and hated by many, met his end, not upon the field of battle, but in the dark, tangled web of conspiracy spun by those he had trusted most. Blood spilled where prayers were whispered, and the echoes of his cries would haunt the stones of Perth for generations to come. The monastery, ancient and solemn, had stood for centuries, its grey stone a silent witness to the tides of Scottish history. It should have been a sanctuary, a place of peace and reflection, but on that fateful night it became a tomb. Inside, the king sat with his most trusted companions, the air warm from the roaring fire, his mood light as he recited a line of verse to his queen. Joan, the ever-steady balance of his fiery temperament, smiled gently, though her eyes held shadows of unease. Perhaps she, like others, had sensed the growing disconnect in the court, the whispers of rebellion that slithered through the cracks of their fragile kingdom. James dismissed such fears with the arrogance of a man who believed himself chosen by God. His reign, though marked by reform and vision, had been plagued by strife. He sought to break the power of the great lords, dragging Scotland from the feudal mire, but the nobles saw him not as a saviour, but a tyrant. It was these men, those who swore loyalty to his crown, even as they plotted his demise, who drew their blades in the cold black of night. The attack came swiftly. A servant's cry shattered the peace of the chamber as the sound of splintering wood heralded the arrival of death. The king's guards, caught unprepared, were cut down before they could reach their swords. Joan screamed, clutching her husband's arm as the conspirators poured into the room, faces grim, eyes alight with the fervour of vengeance. James fought like a cornered lion, armed only with a poker from the hearth. He struck out at his attackers, the firelight glinting off the sweat of his brow. He was no stranger to violence, having spent years in England as a captive before clawing his way to the throne. Yet even he, a man of formidable strength and cunning, could not withstand the tide of treachery that engulfed him. As the Queen's ladies attempted to shield her, Joan's screams turned to cries of defiance. She threw herself at the intruders, her hands clawing at their faces, but they shoved her aside, their focus unrelenting. James saw her fall, her golden hair spilling across the cold stone floor, and his rage ignited anew, but it was futile. A dagger found its mark, plunging into his side, then another and another. The poet king, who had written so beautifully of love and loss, now fell silent, his blood pooling beneath him as the life ebbed from his body. When it was over, the assassins stood amidst the carnage, their breaths ragged, their faces pale. The air reeked of iron and smoke, and for a moment there was only silence. Then came the sound of weeping, the Queen cradling her husband's lifeless body, her tears falling unchecked onto his blood-stained tunic. She looked up at the men who had taken him from her, her eyes burning with hatred that would scorch their souls until their dying days. Outside, the wind howled as if mourning the death of a king, and the first flakes of snow began to fall, covering Perth in a blanket of white. It was a cruel irony that such beauty could follow such horror, but Scotland had always been a land of contrasts. In the days to come, the conspirators would justify their actions as necessary, but the people would remember this night for what it was, a betrayal so profound it would shape the course of their history. And in the dim, flickering light of the monastery, where prayers had once echoed, only one truth remained. The poet king was dead, and with him the fragile peace of a kingdom on the brink of chaos.